Brokerage with my man, Tony, when we get back. Hey everybody, welcome back. So listen, on the logistics life, obviously we're bringing you so many different aspects of logistics and the people in logistics that make up the entire logistics community. And Tonniew Banks is one of them. Tony is the owner of Two Fish Logistics. And Tony it's a Christian-based logistics company. Tony is a preacher, and he's here today to preach some gold nuggets when it comes to logistics in your life. Tony, welcome, my friend.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on here with you today. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure, my man. I can just feel the high vibes coming off of you. Like just when you first logged in and just the smile on your face, I'll tell you, I get really good high vibrational signals from you, my friend. So tell me this, why Christian based? What was the whole methodology behind it? And what with the market the way it is, and things happening the way they're happening in the market, where are you guys at, and what kind of is your way of progressing through some of these challenges? I'm really interested.
Well, brother, because of who I am, it's faith that led me into this. It was God. It was faith. I'm a preacher first and foremost. I need to establish that. I'm a preacher first and foremost before I am a husband, because I am, before I am a brother, because I am, before I am a friend, because I am, before I am a freight broker, because I am. I'm a preacher. I care about people. I care about people's lives, their livelihood, and, where people will spend their eternity. And so I'm going, you mentioned the right word. You mentioned preaching, because I have a habit of doing that. That's just who I am. And so being a preacher, I've known for a long time that I wanted my own business. And somehow I was a truck driver for a few years.
Really?
I was a truck driver. Yes. And I actually really enjoyed it. Some days I actually miss it. I drove flatbed.
Nice.
And I know.
So you're throwing the tarps
I know,
over and doing all that?
Yeah, I know a lot of people don't really like flatbed because they feel it's too much work, but I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. And so after doing that for a few years, I wanted to do something different just because of my situation. I teach a Bible study every Monday at 7 and every Thursday at 6:30 p.m. And so that keeps me busy on top of preaching on the weekend on Sundays, every fourth Sunday. So that keeps me busy. And so I wanted to have a more flexible schedule. And so by the grace of God, I found out about freight brokering. And so I started studying it religiously, and man, I just jumped into the market. Even though it's a tough economy, we got into this thing last August. And so
Good
even
for
though it
you.
is,
You're the second person this week
yes,
that in the middle of a crisis, they're like, no, I'm going all in. I love that. I love it, man.
I'm telling you, it has been faith that has brought me to this point, and I'm leaning on God to continue to carry me through, because it has been tough for sure. For sure, it has been tough, but through it all, I have seen God He's blessed. He has continually blessed, and so, like I said, I want to see people's lives transformed around me. In fact, I did something that probably any freight broker that would see this, they would probably crucify me for it. I had a load. It was a Sprinter van load, and the driver, he asked for a certain amount of money, and I added about $50, $50 to $75, just because I felt, this guy is asking for such a low amount. And I'm like, well, I do have a little extra money in this load. So I'm like, you know what, I'll give this person extra money. And my thinking behind that was, one, because I like to help people. Two, because I appreciate when someone takes the chance on me, because
Mm-hmm.
I know my motives behind things. I know my initiative. Um, but other people don't know that. Other people are going out on a limb. And so for this person to do what they did for me, I wanted to bless them and help them as well. And so I know a lot of I've talked to other brokers, and they were outraged, like as if it was their money. They were outraged. but I just believe God. Everybody doesn't come from that, and I understand, I respect whatever people believe in. I respect that. But I just believe that God will make a way, because I've seen him do it. And so, once I see something to be true, I just continue to tap into that thing and continue to go back to that. And so, in a nutshell, that's kind of how I got here. That's why I jumped in when I did, despite, and trust me, I was nervous about it, because I've just looking at the economy and talking to brokers who were in this thing pre-COVID. They wish the market would go back to those times. And me having not been a broker during that time, look, I wish it would too, just because I've heard how fantastic it was.
You know
But
what? That
you
was a
know
time when nobody had to work and money was abundant. And it's a blip in the radar when it comes. Like, so a couple of things. You just shattered a serious paradigm for me in the last 3.5
hmm
minutes. Um,
hmm
I would, at the beginning of this, my perspective was preaching and brokerage in freight are like the opposite ends of any spectrum you want. And the way you just described it, the way you turned it in, where people, you love people, you love making sure people are happy, living their happiest life. It's really what we do, right? Like if we
hmm
can take the headaches away from our customers and help them live a better life, give them back time, which they don't have. Um,
right.
yeah, you just, I mean, thank you, because that was a serious shift for me, because right when we started talking, I'm like, hold on, you're a preacher and a freight broker? Like, man, I swear all day long. And,
One of them can't
I'm,
be true, huh?
what's that?
One of them can't be true,
Well,
huh?
it's one of those things, is it's like I said, it's like, it's almost like as if it feels like it's two polarities, right? Like you got a negative and a positive, and not one being ill over the other. It's just a negative and a positive polarity when it comes to, preaching and brokerage, right? Um, but when you actually look at it, I mean, I know when I would go to my Bible study, it was very set. There was, we'd read scripture and then we'd talk about it. And well, how does it apply in your life? And as I'm saying this, I'm thinking through my preacher Tim, how he brings everything back to real life examples, right? And I think in
hmm
sales we do that as well, because in sales, when we're speaking with a customer and they say, well, we have this problem, it's like, okay, so we had one of these, and you bring it back to a real life example where you corrected it, right? So that's interesting. So
Right.
let me ask you this, man, my man. Um, you know, when let me rephrase that. So, what would be the main piece of the puzzle when you got into freight brokerage that shocked you the most after being a driver?
I would say just how difficult it is to get people to work with you, which kind of leans into that first story that I was telling you. It's incredibly difficult when you're in the situation that our company is in. We're not one of the big companies of the world. We don't have unlimited capital. And so we're using a factoring company. We're not 100% self-funded, even though we have self-funded some loads. And so coming from that angle, it's tough to get carriers to want to work with you. And on top of that, with the fraud,
Yeah.
I've with fraud, even people who believe you're legitimate, who believe everything about, the situation adds up. They still just say, well, these are the rules, these are the policies. And of course, there are many instances where people will break those policies for you. You know how that is. If you have relationships,
Mm-hmm.
you can get into any doors. But I would definitely say getting carriers to move freight. Now, sure enough, getting freight is very difficult. But being a preacher, and you hit on that, something that I thought about was I study scripture a lot. I try to study anything I get involved with. I try to study it because I really want to excel in it. And so when I started looking at it, I realized preachers are salesmen. We're trying to sell people the idea of God. And that's what freight brokers are doing. We're trying to sell customers, hey, I can help you move your freight. And of course, there are 50 million other people that can help move the freight. However, there is a value that I'm going to add that the other company, the other person, the other group, they don't have this exact same thing. They have things, of course, they have things that they excel in. I'll give you an example. I called a company, and something that I was taught by brokers, I guess I'll do a little exposing here. Something that I was taught by brokers. I was told, call a company and tell them, hey, I'm trying to get set back up with you guys. I used to work with you guys X amount of years ago, and I'm trying to get set up with you guys once again. And so I called a company, and I had did my research, and I was looking for a specific individual. And when I called, I asked for the individual, and the lady that answered the phone, she told me that person no longer works here. And they asked me, did I used to work with them? And I said, no, I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that I used to work with you guys. Although brokers have told me this is exactly what I should do. And I said, no, I'm a preacher and I don't believe in doing those type of things. I don't believe in coming to lie to you. And so instantly that caught the shipper's attention. Now, this doesn't work for everybody, so I'm not telling you that everybody I call, they're just like, wow, it's a Christian-based company. Wow, here's all of our freight. That does not happen. I wish that happened.
Yes.
But that doesn't
I'm
happen.
sure if that's the way it was, there'd be Christian-based companies all over the place tomorrow.
Everywhere.
You know what I'm saying? And, yeah.
Yeah, but there are opportunities, and that's what I believe in. That's what God has shown me. That's what I've seen. And so, yeah, I would definitely say getting freight has been very difficult.
Yeah.
But I feel getting the freight moved has even been more challenging, and not necessarily because carriers don't want to. It's more so from the uh, credit aspect, building company credit. That's the aspect that I really don't hear brokers talk about. I can't tell you how much time I've spent on the phone with Ansonia, trying to understand just how to build credit and it actually be reported. So there's a lot of myths about that. And so
it's interesting you bring that up as a topic, because having a conversation with a student a couple of weeks ago, and he decided to move companies, went from a really large brokerage to a brand new brokerage. And
oh boy,
the sale of the new brokerage was factual. Don't get me wrong, it was factual, because you're at a brokerage that's got 27 offices. They're global, multi-billion-dollar corporation. There's still sales leads available, but some of the ones you want to go after, right? The ones that you might have a relationship with, or at least know somebody, or think you can get in the door, or somebody says, hey, you should call this person, I'll introduce you. They're taken because somebody's soliciting, right? So you have that pro and con when it comes to large corporations, small corporations, right? Large corporations maybe have better tech than you might have for tracking, tracing, direct integration, global companies where it's inside the same shell. But on the flip side, the smaller companies, from a sales perspective, it's wide open. And so this was his perspective going into this new company. And he goes, Dan, I very quickly learned like 80% of my carriers aren't set up. So I go and I say, okay, this is our, and they're like, whoa, timeout. Like, who is this? They opened up 6 months ago. Like, and he goes, he said the exact same thing. And so in a couple of weeks, you're the second person to say that to me. He goes, nobody talks about this. Nobody talks about the difficulty of credit in today's day and age. You know, you think about credit during COVID, and it was almost like people weren't even doing credit checks. It was like, you got a load, I got a truck, you're going to pay me what I want. Okay, fine, thank you. And it was like, it's just a totally different feeling now in the market, right? And so I get that. I mean, you're grinding on one end and you're double grinding on the other end in order to make that first grind a reality. Like that's a difficult situation. I honor you for that, my man.
Yes, sir. Brother, I'm telling you, I would probably have quit if I were not relying on God to help me. I'm telling you,
Yeah.
I probably would have quit. You mentioned that. I wonder how many of the smaller brokerages, like the ones that you mentioned, the smaller brokerages like our company, like the company the student went to, I wonder how many of those actually survive. Um, Ones that are
Not
not
very
being
many, I don't
backed.
think.
Exactly. Ones that are not being backed by a lot of money. And when you have that money, you can afford to kind of get around the credit aspect much easier. So
Well,
yeah, that's very interesting.
you know, so that makes me think of a customer of mine. When I was in actually in the logistics market, like world full time. I had a customer of mine that was a small brokerage. It was just two people, husband and wife. And they did a ton of air freight. They had 5 customers they've had for 25 years. They maintained those 5 customers. They did everything for those 5 customers. 2 of them are pharmaceutical, so we got all the OTR for pharmaceutical. They did all the air and ocean. We had carnets. We had cooling units that went on planes. We did it all, and they made a very good life for themselves. Very good life. I mean, they would go over to Egypt and they would work from Egypt because they had to do hour work a day because they had all of their suppliers lined up, right? If I were to give any advice to new companies today, it would be reverse engineer. I call it reverse engineered logistics. Very simple term. It is reversing the way you sell. So you go out, you find the suppliers. Like I say to a ton of my students, go to your top 5 to 10 suppliers. If you go to your top 10 suppliers, find out where they want to go, how many times are they there a week, what is the rate, what is the delivery times, how long have they delivered. Like, you go through the gamut of questions with them. You will have all the freight you ever need, because and you're dealing with somebody who has the same values, the same ethics, the same service standards as you're promising, right? And we found, like, during the 18-19 like roller coaster ride that was logistics prior to COVID, our costs literally went up like 3%. Where everybody else's costs were 50, 100%, 150, 200% higher. It was like a mini COVID bloodbath for shippers, right? During 2018. And then were you weren't open in 2018, right? Because you opened in August.
Correct.
Yeah. So it was like a mini bloodbath. Maybe you were on the road then. But
Yes.
it's amazing how, and again, I could be totally offbeat here, but I'm thinking it's when companies try to grow too fast, too quick. They try to take on more. They don't realize, like you being a small company, right? You're not going to go out to a shipper that has 400 loads a week and try and get their business, because you're just never going to be able to do it. You're just going to ruin your reputation, your image, your credibility, your brand, right? And I think this is what happens with a lot of them is they start living outside their means. They start really designing their company to be a multi-billion-dollar company when they haven't even hit $500,000 yet. Do you know what I mean? Because you can,
Yeah.
like, you only need 3 to 5 really good customers that honor you, that cherish your work, and you can live one of the greatest lives you've ever lived, because you can work from anywhere in the world. You have your suppliers taken care of, like, and it doesn't take much of your day once you set everything up, right? It's what I've always
Mhm.
found, and maybe you share your thoughts on it. When I was younger, like, I first got in this industry at 17, and I found it was like a badge of honor to be answering my phone all weekend and all night. It was like you come in the office in the morning, like, dude, man, I was up all night taking care of a customs issue. And I remember one of my colleagues saying to me, he goes, why? And I said, well, because there was an issue. He goes, yeah, but if you would have done your effing job during the day, you wouldn't have had to take that call. Why would you want to take the call at 2 o'clock in the morning? You're sleeping. And I'm like, damn, that's actually true. Like, when you start thinking about it, right? It was a young man's game, taking calls at 2 o'clock in the morning. I ain't into that no more. When I'm sleeping, I'm sleeping. And so I'm curious, you know, you're dealing with like a pretty serious fight. Let's call a spade, right? A pretty serious fight on each end. I bet you got to be way more um, meticulous with crossing your T's and dotting your I's.
Yes, and that's who I am anyways.
Good.
I'm very skeptical, I'm very detail oriented. And so even when I know something is right, I'll, like, you talk about customs issues, like we're actually moving some containers. And I've had situations where, I've lost money. And so dealing with those situations, it makes me check things 2, 3, 4 times just
Mm-hmm.
because I want to be certain that everything is correct. And also, I want to give a good product to the customer as well. I don't want to build a reputation of making a lot of errors and making mistakes. Of course, we're human, we make mistakes. I make mistakes just like the next person. But yes, yes, being very meticulous, that's who I am, anyways. The Bible says, be careful for nothing. And you better
Mm.
believe I try to be very careful. That's why I love, coming into this industry, being a preacher, because there's a lot of things that God tries to teach us that will help us in business. People don't realize that, but the Bible talks about money and business probably more than anything. I mean, I could go on and on about that, but yeah, the things that I learned from scripture, it actually helps me in the business world. Um, it just gives a different perspective. And so,
Yes.
yes, yes,
Yes.
being very careful. Have to do that. I have to.
It's
With
interesting you
compliance.
it's interesting you say
Yeah, go
that,
ahead.
Tony, because um, just literally 3 days ago, I was talking to a friend of mine about the book of Job, and saying, like,
Hmm.
this man went through all sorts of stuff before he found success, right? Like, to the nth degree. And it was, and we were talking about, like, when things pop, and the whole perspective of overnight success, and nobody sees what you're doing right now. It's when Two Fish Logistics gets to a certain level, they're gonna be like, where'd Tony come from?
Right,
But they don't see all
right,
the grunt, they don't see the book of Job behind the actual success, right? And you're right. I
right.
mean, and again, thank you, you're crushing so many, like, paradigms for me today. But yeah, I mean, the Bible talks about business. They talk about ethics. It talks about, structuring friendships. It talks about the longevity of friendships. It talks about all of that. It's not just, oh my gosh, it's religion and, that's it. There's major contexts behind it. What if you were to say, out of one book in the Bible, what would be the closest to what you're going through in logistics right now?
Ooh, that is a tough question there. Um, I guess without having, I don't want to think about it too
Top
long.
of your head.
I, I think I would go with Job,
Yeah.
not from the standpoint of, so Job, he actually had success originally.
Yes.
He was very rich. He was very rich, wealthy. His family prospered. He had all his children, all the land, the cattle, and he lost it all. So not from that standpoint. And then he, of course, got very sick. So I can't relate to him from that aspect. That's how I became a preacher. I became very sick. Um, I was in the best shape of my life. And to make a long story short, I got so sick I couldn't even get up out of bed. Like it was terrible. I had so many tests ran. Doctors never could find anything. Long story short, I have to tell you that story for another time. I don't know if we'll have enough time for that. But ended up becoming a preacher. And you know what? I would say Abraham. I would say
Good
Genesis.
call.
I would say Genesis. And I actually was teaching a Bible study last night. And in the book of Hebrews 11, it talks about how Abraham, God told him to leave his homeland. He left his mother and father, and he went to a land he had no clue where he was going.
Oh,
Not
yes. Good,
a
good
clue.
choice.
And so I would say that represents where we are right now. We are taking this thing day by day. We don't know what the end is going to look like. However, we're trusting in God, believing that where He leads us, it's where we need to be. It's going to be some trouble along the way because God knows we've already had trouble. But I believe if we continue to stick with God, it'll work out in the end. So yeah, I would actually say Abraham. I definitely would say Abraham,
I love
just
that.
because of the struggles that he had. Even having a child at virtually 100 years old, and God having promised him that at the age of 75, and he's praying. They're literally trying to go and do things their own way, and it doesn't work. And God does it in His own time. And so that's what I'm seeing God do for us. It's according to His time. And one other thing I wanted to add, because you talked about sometimes we become overzealous,
Mm-hmm.
and we want the success to happen instantly. This is why I'm very careful. I have to check things so many times because I want to make sure I'm making the right decision, because I know if I make the wrong decision, it's going to set me back far greater than, peradventure, even if the decision is a good decision. If I make the wrong decision, it's going to set me back twice the amount of time. And so I hate making crucial mistakes. Yeah, I'll make some small mistakes, but making those pivotal mistakes, I like to learn from other people. People people say the best way to learn is by experience. I agree with that, but I also like to watch other people's mistakes, and so I can avoid falling into the same traps. And so I've seen some companies, some startup companies, they will go out, and they were never brokers in the industry, never even dispatched, never did anything from that side of logistics. And so they want to start a business, and they go out and hire a bunch of agents, having never moved a load themselves, not knowing what goes into moving one single load. Doesn't matter what type of load. And I've seen businesses like this fail. And so I'm sure if people would look at my company and those people's companies, they would say, I choose that other company every day of the week because, they got these agents, they're moving this freight, they're doing that. And I've seen these companies fail because of, it wasn't strategic. It was overzealous, as I mentioned. It was too sporadic and too quick. And so,
I love that.
I try to learn. I try to learn those lessons because, some things we can't come back from, but some things people never make it back from. Some things people never make it back.
What is your framework for making decisions?
Well, I base everything I do off of what the scripture says. Because if I get away from it, I was having this conversation with someone last night. If I get away from it, I'm getting away from where God is leading me. There are things, for example, I went to college. I went to a Division I school, um, the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss. For
Ole Miss.
anybody that's yes, any sports fans, they probably have heard of Ole Miss.
Well, I think
I
everybody
actually
heard of
used
Ole Miss after what was the movie?
Blindside.
Blindside. Yes, great
Yes,
movie. Yeah.
yes. So I went to school there. I was in the health field. I was in the health field. My plan was to do physical therapy or something along those lines. And having worked for the football team, my goal, like I said, those were my goals, but God changed them. And so what I realized over time, now it took me some time to realize this, but I have certain desires for myself that God might not have for me. I might think it's good for me to work with. There might be a customer that you might know someone and you might want to bless me. Now, I'm not saying this is the case. I'm just using an example.
Mm-hmm.
But you might say, "Hey, I've got this customer that I really think you should look into. I think you guys would be a good fit." But if God puts this strong unction over me, this strong feeling of this isn't the way you should go, even though I might look at, wow, this customer could change this customer could change the trajectory of our company, though, I still would have to turn that down
Mm-hmm.
because God can see further than I can. You know, speaking of Abraham, that's what happened with Lot. When Abraham and Lot, their servants got into a disagreement, Abraham told Lot, which was his nephew, he said, we're brothers, we're brethren. Let's not fight. Let's separate. You go one way, I'll go the other way. And he allowed Lot to choose which direction he wanted to go. Lot chose based off of how good it looked. He looked toward the land of Sodom and Gomorrah, and it was the ground prospered, the ground flourished. It was so green, I'm sure. It looked good. But he got down there, and that city ended up being destroyed. But the place that Abraham chose, it was barren. Nothing was there. It looked dead. But God turned it around for him. And so that's how I have to make decisions, not based on how it looks, not based on what I might personally want. I need to seek God. I need to be led by him. I'm always praying, God, give me an unction. Let me truly feel, let me truly be led to making the right decision. You know, even because I've talked to my wife, the times where I've given carriers more money than they even asked for. I felt led to do that. I'm not telling you every time I did that. Now, God knows I did that every time. But there are certain instances where I feel, you know what? I think it should be more. And I want God to do that to me, regardless of how somebody else takes it and somebody else may look at it and feel a way. See, I don't know what God is going to do on the other side. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I want to get to that place. And if I don't do what he's asking me to do right here, I will never get over there. And so I have to make decisions that way. And I'm sure that's unorthodox thinking for a lot of people, because a lot of people would just say, man, just make the decision that seems to be right. Just make the decision that seems to be okay. But the Bible declares to me there's a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. And so, yeah,
well, you know what? And that's how you make your decisions, right? That's and you know, as much as I think people try and force the way they do things onto other people, that's the way you make your decisions. Your ICP, your ideal client profile, is based on the road God gives you, and that's it. It's very simple, right? And it's the reason I asked you that, because some people have specific frameworks, like, you know, acronyms or everything that they go through. I've got another friend of mine, Will. He's the same way. He's like, things are happening. Just give me an hour. I got to pray on it. I'll get back to you on it. And gets back to me. You know what I mean? And it's like, okay. And it's that clarity, right? I mean, you know
Right.
what? Tony, I honor you. I respect you for doing what you're doing, man. Keep up the good fight. Keep going, and we'll definitely be talking soon, my man.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your time and I appreciate everything you're doing.
Oh, thank you.